All right, so are you ready to deep dive with us?
Always.
Great, because today we're going to look at a fascinating and honestly pretty chaotic period.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's the birth of the Indonesian Republic right after World War II.
Right at the dawn of independence.
Exactly, and we're going to be looking at it through the eyes of, well, the nation's first prime minister, a guy named Sutan Shahrir.
Interesting choice. Why him?
Well, for one, we have this incredible source, and let me tell you, Shahrir, he does not hold back.
Oh, is that right? Spill the tea.
He talks about purging Indonesia of, well, what he calls the Japanese disease. He warns about the dangers of propaganda, and get this.
What?
He even criticizes his own government.
No way. Talk about a leader willing to call it as he sees it.
Right. This speech is just packed with insights, so you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so to really get Shahrir and what he was dealing with, we need to rewind a bit. Remember, Indonesia had just endured 3.5 years under brutal Japanese rule. We're talking forced labor, economic exploitation. The Japanese really did a number on the country.
It was a brutal time, for sure. But wasn't their strategy also to really sow division among the Indonesians?
You're exactly right. And Shahrir himself actually said, and this is a quote, "They tried to deflect the deep and growing hatred they aroused against the whites, against the Chinese, and against the Pangar Pra."
So they were basically weaponizing pre-existing tensions, creating a legacy of distrust that really haunted Indonesia even after they gained their independence.
It's crazy, right?
It is. So think about the challenge Shahrir faced. How do you unite a nation when the very fabric of society has been so deliberately torn apart? It wasn't just about rebuilding infrastructure.
Yeah.
It was about rebuilding trust, about forging a shared identity after years of just constant manipulation and division.
And this is actually what leads to one of Shahrir's most, I think, insightful observations. He was so worried about the impact of Japanese occupation on Indonesian youth.
Oh, interesting. In what way?
Well, he was really concerned about their tendency toward blind obedience and what he called a hatred of foreigners.
I see. So it's almost like he's witnessing a generation grappling with this sort of post-trauma situation, like young people who are conditioned to follow orders.
Yeah.
But now suddenly they're thrust into a world where critical thinking and individual responsibility are, well, paramount.
Right. And then, well, this is where Shahrir, he just drops a total bombshell.
Okay, lay it on me.
He straight up criticizes his own government.
Wow.
He calls out, and I quote, "men without real character who are in these positions of power."
So what's he getting at? What did he see as the problem?
Well, he saw this really fundamental problem. Many of the people running the newly independent Indonesia, they were the same ones who had collaborated with the Japanese.
Oh, wow. So their loyalty was super questionable.
Exactly. And their commitment to true democracy was, well, shaky at best. He even suggests that some of these guys felt indebted to the Japanese, like the Japanese had given them this taste of power.
It's like they were clinging to the remnants of the old order, even as they were being tasked with building something entirely new. It's fascinating.
It is. And you might be thinking, wait, isn't Shahrir the prime minister? You know, why is he airing all this dirty laundry?
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to his profound commitment to, democratic ideals. He wasn't afraid to call out hypocrisy, even within his own ranks.
He's putting his principles before his political career.
Absolutely. Shahrir understood that true independence demanded more than just a change in leadership.
Right.
It required a fundamental shift in values. It was about rejecting this authoritarian mindset that had taken root during the occupation. He actually called it a democratic revolution.
A democratic revolution. So is he calling for, like, armed uprisings?
No, not at all. When he says democratic revolution, Shahrir's not talking about, violent overthrow. What he meant was a much deeper societal shift.
I see.
Purging those fascist remnants, empowering citizens, and building a system that was grounded in social justice.
So not just toppling statues and rewriting laws.
Right.
But changing hearts and minds.
Right.
Establishing this whole new social contract.
Exactly. And that is a tall order for any nation, let alone one that's, fresh out of the frying pan of occupation.
Definitely.
So it's almost like he's saying, hey, we got rid of the Japanese, but their ideas are still lingering.
Right, like this ideological hangover.
Exactly. We need a total system reboot. But how do you even start to tackle something that ingrained?
That is the million-dollar question, and Shahrir knew it wouldn't be easy. He understood that to achieve true democracy, well, it demanded more than just elections and institutions.
Right.
It required a real commitment to social justice, individual liberty, and a deep respect for human dignity.
They're pretty lofty ideals.
They are. But these are the values he really believed would set Indonesia apart from its colonial past and, pave the way for a brighter future.
It's easy to talk about those big ideas, but how do you instill them in a population that's been through so much? You can't just wave a magic wand and everyone's suddenly a Democrat. Right?
Yeah, no magic wand, that's for sure. Shahrir was a pragmatist. He knew it would be long, it would be arduous, and it would require education, open dialogue, and a willingness to confront those painful legacies, head on. He had faith in the Indonesian people. He believed in their ability to shape their own destiny, but he also knew they would need guidance and strong leadership to get there.
Which is where his focus on young people comes in.
Exactly.
Shahrir saw them as this key to breaking free from the past and embracing a truly democratic future. It's funny. Every generation thinks they're the ones to change the world.
It's true.
But I think in this case, Shahrir might have been onto something.
I think so, too. He saw the potential of young people, their energy, their idealism, that burning desire to make a real difference. But he also saw the dangers they faced. Remember, the Japanese had specifically targeted Indonesian youth with their propaganda, instilling this sense of blind obedience and xenophobia.
Right, and it's powerful stuff.
It is really tough to shake off.
He even called out their tendency towards violence. And he saw it as this symptom of, frustration and this lack of direction. He even called it a psychological opiate.
A way to numb the pain of disillusionment.
Yeah, think about it. These young people were promised a better future by the Japanese,
right,
only to be left with a broken country and just a ton of uncertainty.
It's no wonder that some of them turned to violence as an outlet.
So it's like Shahrir's calling for a revolution of the heart and mind as much as a revolution of the political system.
He wanted to change how Indonesians thought about themselves, their country, and their place in the world. It's a pretty radical notion when you think about it.
It is, and it's even more remarkable when you remember that Shahrir himself was a product of colonialism. He had experienced the harsh realities firsthand, but he wasn't content with just, liberating Indonesia from Dutch rule. He dreamed of a world where all people were treated with dignity and respect.
Regardless of nationality,
ethnicity,
religion, any of it.
It's a powerful vision.
It is. And that brings us to another really key element of Shahrir's thinking, his commitment to internationalism.
Right. We're talking about a guy leading a brand new nation, still finding its feet, and yet here he is already talking about global cooperation and human fellowship.
And this wasn't just some idealistic pipe dream. Shahrir was deeply influenced by socialist thought and these internationalist ideals. He truly believed that Indonesia's future was, tied to the fate of the world.
It's like their futures were intertwined.
Exactly. For Shahrir, true independence, it meant more than just political sovereignty.
Right.
It meant embracing a global outlook, recognizing our shared humanity, and working together to address these common challenges.
Again, pretty aspirational stuff, especially considering what was going on in the world at the time. The Cold War is brewing.
Right. The world's dividing itself into camps.
And Shahrir's basically saying, hey, let's not pick sides. Let's just build bridges instead.
It was a bold stance and, one that would later influence Indonesia's foreign policy, particularly their role in the non-aligned movement during the Cold War.
Which, for anyone who needs a refresher, that was a group of nations that chose not to side with the U.S. or the Soviet Union,
advocating instead for peace and cooperation.
So Shahrir's thinking went way beyond just fixing Indonesia's immediate post-occupation problems.
He was laying out this vision for a more just and equitable world order.
A world where nations work together for the common good. But let's be real, did he actually make any headway in achieving these goals?
Well, that's the question we're going to tackle in the final part of our deep dive. We'll examine the lasting impact of Shahrir's ideas and how they shaped Indonesia's path, both domestically and on the world stage.
So we've talked about his critiques, we've looked at his vision, but the big question is, did it work? Did he succeed?
Did Indonesia shake off that Japanese disease and build that truly just and democratic society?
Yeah, was he able to put his money where his mouth was?
Well, history rarely gives us easy answers, right? It's not like there's this finish line and we can say, yep, Shahrir nailed it.
Right. But it would be naive to pretend that, everything was perfect, right?
Of course.
There have been dark chapters, periods of authoritarianism, human rights abuses, ethnic and religious conflicts, things that seem to really contradict everything Shahrir stood for.
Absolutely. And those darker chapters, they remind us that democracy is fragile.
It is.
And it requires constant vigilance and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths.
So that Japanese disease you talked about, it never really went away.
Well, the tendency towards fascism and xenophobia, it's a persistent threat, not just in Indonesia. Really, it's global.
So almost like he's speaking to us today.
Right, like he's looking across the decades saying, don't get complacent. This fight for justice, for equality, for human dignity, it's never over.
And he's also challenging us to think beyond, our own little bubbles.
Exactly. Shahrir's vision of human fellowship, it might sound idealistic, but it's a powerful reminder.
Of what?
Well, that our fates are intertwined, that global problems need global solutions.
So why should we care? Why does this matter to our listeners today? What's the takeaway here?
Well, I think Shahrir's story gives us a bit of both inspiration and caution.
Okay.
On one hand, it reminds us that even in the midst of chaos, you can articulate a bold vision for a better future.
Right.
And inspire others to strive for it. But it's also a sobering reminder. Achieving that vision takes constant work.
Yeah, it's not one and done thing.
It's a commitment to building a society based on empathy and understanding.
Not fear and division.
Exactly. And that's really his call to action.